Gaming Guild proudly brings to you the Nat-Pun podcast.
Hi everybody, welcome back to the Nat-Pun podcast. My name is Ash and I will be your lead presenter for today's episode and your only presenter for today's episode. We did previously say that there'd be no episodes of the Nat-Pun podcast released in April because of scheduling issues with myself, John, Andy and Bertie. However, one of our trustees, our newest, shiniest trustee, Chris, came up with this fantastic idea for some lore episodes. Where I can spend some time lore dumping from my brain into the Nat-Pun podcast and telling you a little bit more about our world of the All Havens. I thought it was a fantastic idea. Anyone who's spent any time with me will know there is so much lore about our world inside my mind that it would be great for me to unload some of that so that you can enjoy a little bit more depth about the All Havens, what it's all about, and learn a little bit more about our world. So that's what these episodes are going to be. These are our Loremaster episodes where we will take a deeper dive into some different aspects of the All Havens. This means that when you're listening to the Nat-Pun podcast, The Adventures of G, Adonis and Vesper, you're going to know a little bit more about the world. Maybe if you come along to some of our events, you're going to know a little bit more about the world that you're playing in and some of the people, characters and places that you might see on your travels. So I'm quite looking forward to this. I'm quite excited. I am on my own, so this is going to be an episode purely of me just speaking. So if you don't like my voice, unfortunately, you're going to hear a lot of it this episode. And perhaps we'll bring some guests on to Loremasters. Who knows? We'll see what happens. We'll see how you guys react to this. We'll see if you like the episodes or not. But what I would like you to do is make sure you jump over onto the Discord server. Go down to the Nat-Pun chat and let me know what you want to hear about in Loremasters. We can cover any topic in the world, anything at all, nothing's off limits. And I can give you some more information, some more depth into our world, which you, our listeners, our players, have all helped to develop over the past 5 years or so. So, I was thinking about what we start with in our very first episode of Loremasters, and I think we start from the top of the tree. I think we need to start with the gods. If we start looking at our gods, then we can kind of work our way backwards, and we'll talk about how the world was made in a different episode, and we can talk about all that good stuff as well. And then those big world-changing events we're going to cover too. And those are going to be your Loremaster episodes for the month of April. If you really like Loremaster episodes, then maybe we'll do some Patreon exclusive ones. And if you want to see or be ready for that when they hit, head over to patreon.com/CharityDND. Make sure you subscribe to Patreon tiers and come and support us at Charity Gaming Guild. It's really important that we're able to support the fantastic charities that we do support each year. And our members, our Patreons, are the absolute lifeblood of what we do. Now, just before I do start talking about our fantastic dichotomy of gods, I just want to remind you all that we have loads of events coming up as well. And there are tickets still available for all of those events through 2026 after Elite Adventures, which is very recently sold out. You can come along to any of those events. It doesn't matter how experienced or inexperienced you are. Our Dungeon Masters are the best in the world, and we make no secret of that. So they can hold your hand through the adventure, even through character creation. We'll put you in touch with your fellow players through the Discord server, and we can all go and have a great time. If you're going to pick one adventure to come to, make it November. Make it Rise of the Ancients, our 12-hour sponsored game. Those are the biggest games we run. They're the most important games we run in terms of our narrative as well. And when we talk about future episodes of Loremasters and those big narrative events, those are the games that we're going to be focusing on. Okay, enough of me plugging our events, which you can find on facebook.com/CharityDND. I think it's time that we actually talk about the gods. Now, initially, when our world was first made, we had a wide-ranging pantheon of gods. And we had gods for everything, and some of those names, those of you who've been around a while will know. Names like Melora and Pelor, and Azrael and Bane and Bahamut. Those names will be familiar to you, and we had this pantheon, and it was great. The pantheon were fantastic. However, we decided to take a step in a different direction. And before I start talking about the gods that we've got, I think it's important that you as our players understand why we changed the pantheon. First of all, it was a really cool narrative. It was going to create some immense spectacles on the tabletop, some great engagement for our players and our attendees at our events. And that was a real driving factor. That's always number one at the top of our list. Is if we can make our events and our games great and exciting and interesting and wonderful, you guys are going to want to come along and play in them. And that means that the charity is going to grow and we're going to be able to support other charities more easily and with greater amounts of money. So that's always our driving factor. However, there was a second driving factor of us changing the Pantheon. And this was about the time Wizards of the Coast decided to try and change their OGL. For those of you who don't know what an OGL is, I'm not going to bore you with the nitty gritty. It's the open game license, and it's what allows creators and people like us to use Dungeons and Dragons to create our own content and also sell that content and be able to make money off that content, albeit we do it for charity and not for profit. That OGL wasn't well received, and so we decided to take some steps to try and future-proof our own intellectual property as a charity, and that meant changing our Pantheon and moving away from those names, which had become synonymous with Dungeons & Dragons. The decision had to be made as to how we did that. Now, as someone who loves an epic narrative, I thought no greater way of doing this would be than to cause the gods to plummet to earth and to have our players try and resurrect them and bring them back into the Pantheon. And that was our 12-hour event, Dark Ascension, which we will talk about on a different day. The upshot of all of this is that we've ended up with two gods. Both of our gods were previously player characters, and this is a really important concept that we have in the Charity Gaming Guild of making sure that our players are engaged with our narrative and the decisions that they make actually matter and actually make a difference. The first god we got was the evil god, Xaphon. And Xaphon was my character that I played in Chris's campaign. And he initially appeared in the Isles of Time campaign which Chris ran. He was a fallen Aasimar Warlock of the Fiend, and he was great fun to play. He was so much fun. Yes, he was evil, but he honestly truly believed that what he was doing was good. He worshipped the god Asmodeus. Now, let's talk about the original IP for Dungeons & Dragons. Initially, Chris's campaign wasn't set in the All Havens. It was set somewhere else, so I picked a more generic god. Over time, when Chris moved his campaign into the All Havens, we learned that Asmodeus and Azrael are kind of the same being and kind of merged Xaphon into Azrael's worship. Over the course of the campaign, Xaphon would try and recruit his fellow party members and pretty much anyone who would listen to his cult, to his following of his god. Now, I mentioned that he truly and honestly believed that he was doing the right thing, and he absolutely did. Xaphon was abandoned as a baby and taken in as a cult and raised within this cult. That cult devoted themselves to Asmodeus or Azrael, the god of death, and so Xaphon knows nothing other than this cult. And that kind of taints everything that he does. When it came to running Xaphon as a player within the party, I had to be careful to make sure an evil aligned character wasn't going to butt heads with the party, and the way that I did that was through that exact method of making sure that it was clear that Xaphon thought he was doing the right thing. It led to some really cool role-playing moments, particularly between Xaphon and Adamar, which anyone who knows anything about Xaphon and Adamar will know that there's a bit of a love-hate relationship there, in so much as Xaphon loves Adamar and Adamar absolutely hates Xaphon. Adamar, was played by Niall, one of our longest standing members, and that was an amazing bit of roleplay. I used to absolutely love bouncing off Niall in those RP sessions, and I think it was quite amusing for everybody else as well. One of our other members, Dave, has come up with some lore as well between Xaphon and Adamar, which is lovely to see, and that kind of legacy does live on. Another interaction within that party that was particularly important for developing Xaphon's character was with Mouse, or Bertie's character. Obviously, everyone listening knows Bertie as Vesper, but Bertie also played Mouse in Chris's campaign. And Mouse was very confused by Xaphon, not really understanding where he sits on the line of good versus evil. And to see that kind of, not conflict, but that uncertainty was really cool and really fun to see, and quite rewarding for me to see as well. When Xaphon stepped back and maybe he was away from Mouse, and Mouse would have these RP moments of, I've got this book, and on one side are friends and on one side are enemies, and Xaphon's like right in the middle, and I don't really know whether he's good or whether he's bad. That was really kind of gratifying for me because it told me that I was role-playing Xaphon in the right way. And I think it's a bit of a lesson in how we can run evil characters within Dungeons and Dragons, even in a mixed alignment party. So a party that is made up of good and evil characters, and how you can gel them together still and allow them to do what they want or need to do. Xaphon met his demise in Chris's campaign at the hands of Azrael. And that's really when we took Xaphon out of the campaign and dropped him into our narrative within the world. Now, Xaphon's first outing was in Azrael's Sundering, which was our first ever 12-hour game. Xaphon was not quite the BBEG, but nearly the BBEG, in so much that he was trying to bring the god of death into the mortal realm, and he absolutely wrecked Oceanhold in the process. We set a lot of groundwork in that 12-hour session. We set groundwork for some of the gods being worshipped, the people of Oceanhold, Yorick Wavewalker, who was the leader of Oceanhold at the time. We also spoke about Azrael and Xaphon, and perhaps most importantly, Archinometers. Archinometers are a piece of equipment that has been around the world for a very, very long time, and players who played in our last 12-hour session, the World Anvil, will know all about Archinometers, as will the guys up at Field CIC in St Helens. You guys during Project Archeliodon learned about Archinometers and how they worked as well. They're a very unique piece of equipment. If you want to know more about Archinometers, make sure you head over to Discord and let me know, and I'll do a little segment in one of these Loremaster sessions on Archinometers and what they are and how they work. Well, not how they work, because they don't work, because they pretend and magic isn't real, but yeah, you know what I mean. So that campaign, or that 12-hour session rather, Azrael Sundering, was really important. It brought Azrael into the world, it wrecked Oceanhold, and it set Xaphon up to be the bad guy. Now, post Azrael Sundering, what essentially happened was Xaphon realised how incompetent Azrael is as a god, and so took steps to usurp him. In between Azrael Sundering and Dark Ascension, there were a number of years where Xaphon was getting his ducks in a row with a view to cause the Pantheon to descend, and that happened at Xaphon's hands. Xaphon removed the Pantheon from the Celestial Realm and from the Hells, and sent them plummeting to the material plane. That allowed Xaphon to take his place in Hell. Now, the three gods that we had in Hell previously were Azrael, Bane and Veron. Azrael we've already heard about, god of death, Bane the god of war, and Veron the god of lies. Those are our gods, so if they are slightly different to the official pantheon, which I can never really remember, then that's the reason why. Within the All Havens Hell, there was still a blood war raging between devils and demons. Azrael was in charge of all of the devils, and Bane was in charge of all of the demons. But with Xaphon coming along, he's been able to end the blood war. He's been able to put devils and demons on the same side, mostly. He's not managed to do it entirely successfully, which is probably why we've not had a massive uprising from Hell. But he has managed to end the blood war for the most part and unite the realms of Hell. That's a problem. That's a very big problem for the material realm, because when Xaphon decides to push up and try and invade, it's going to be a big, big fight. Devils and demons united standing side by side is going to cause a lot of issues for the material realm, and somehow the material realm is going to have to come together to defeat him. Xaphon's no fool. He knows that. He knows that if the whole world unites, they probably could force back the denizens of Hell. So that's why he's spending some time trying to fracture the world. That's why Xaphon has had some input in the World Anvil. That's why we've seen the world be smashed apart and smashed to pieces. It's all through Xaphon's influence. He's setting himself up for something epic. Something really, really big. I'm not going to give you any more than that on kind of Xaphon's plans, because I don't want to spoil what's coming up in the next sort of few years or so, but it's definitely worth playing our games and trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. One of the things that we always do is draw a narrative thread through everything, and this is no different. What I will give you a bit more about is Xaphon's kind of creation, so what he looks like and how he was played as a player character. Might give you some idea as to how he might be if and when you come across him during the course of your games and campaigns. As I already said, Xaphon was my character, Warlock, Fallen Azamar of the Fiend, for Chris's initially Isles of Time campaign. I wrote Xaphon in an evening and was immediately really, really happy with him. Kind of fell in love with the idea of this character that would push out and become really evangelistic and try and recruit people to his cult. And one of the very first things I did was actually research Asmodeus. Having created the All Havens and running the All Havens almost exclusively, I didn't have much of a background in the official Faerun pantheon or anything like that. And so what I did was research Asmodeus and wrote 6 full A4 sides of notes on Asmodeus. And that came from all sorts of sources. It came from official Wizards of the Coast material, it came from wikis, it came from forums. It didn't really matter how lore accurate it was. And that's one of the things I love about this game, especially in our world, is we can make the lore be whatever we want the lore to be. And that was definitely the case of Asmodeus. I had all of these notes, and I wish I still had them somewhere. I probably still do. Maybe one day I'll dig them out and post them so you can read them. But my idea was basically, as soon as someone engages Xaphon, to just unleash this torrent of information about Asmodeus. And that would be the introduction that Xaphon had to the party. I will never forget the introduction. It was in a tavern, and the party came across Xaphon. Chris was the DM, and someone engaged Xaphon. I can't remember who it was. Someone spoke to Xaphon, and I just started literally going through the notes, line by line, in Xaphon's very obvious voice that everyone knows who's heard Xaphon speak. I'm not going to do it here. You're going to have to ask me to do it in person if you want me to do it in person. Although, to be fair, Chris does a pretty good Xaphon as well. And I just kept going and going and going. And I'm going through these notes. I'm thinking in a minute someone's going to stop me, but nobody did. It ended up being Chris that stopped me. And after the game he said, I had to stop you because I don't think anybody else would have. And it was quite funny just to see like this kind of tirade of information going to the party. But it was a great introduction, and it set Xaphon's character, and immediately the rest of the party knew exactly what he was all about, and they knew what I was going to be trying to do, and it worked. It was fun, it was interesting. And throughout the campaign, Xaphon had a book, and he was getting people to sign the book and signing people up to his religion, his cult, which he believed was the best thing ever in the world. In terms of what Xaphon looked like, when I create characters, I like to find a piece of reference artwork, and I tend to do that before I even write the character, because it gives me a flavour, it gives me something to work towards. It's just how I like doing it. It's not necessarily the right or only way to do it. And I found this artwork of this warlock, kind of in the throes of casting a magic spell. He had energy in his hands, and his hair was kind of a little bit sort of swirling in this magical energy. And immediately I saw it and thought, yeah, that's him, that's Xaphon. So I took that image and I used that to springboard into Xaphon himself. So Xaphon looked like a normal human. He had shoulder length, dark coloured hair and a neat trimmed beard. The only thing that was slightly different about Xaphon was he did have one blue eye and one red eye. And that kind of was what demarked him as not human and also of a warlock kind of nature. As time progressed in the campaign, other things did happen to Xaphon too. In a game that I think it was Tilly, which was Aya's character, ran with like a knife. Xaphon messed up and cut his own finger off. So he now also has this metal finger. So some of you might have come across in games a metal finger, which is a link back to Xaphon as well. And that was just another thing that kind of built his character a little bit. In terms of actual mechanical gameplay, being a warlock, you have very, very few spell slots. And what I used to do a lot with Xaphon was summon demons, so Balguras and Vrox being his 2 favourites. And we had some funny moments with those as well. I'll remember falling from the sky and Adamar using spells like Dimension Door to try and get down, and Xaphon just summoned a Vrock, which did land him safely, and then he lost control of it and had to fight it. So it was an interesting dynamic with Xaphon. He never really knew what was going to happen. But it was good fun, and that was the most important thing for me, because I really enjoyed playing Xaphon as a player character. Making NPCs in our world and creating them from player characters is something that we've done a lot, but Xaphon was the first one we tried that with, and we trialed it with Xaphon because obviously he was my character, so I knew that we could just give him up and do that, and luckily it's worked. And anyone who's come across Xaphon in any of our games will know how chaotic and mad he can truly be, and also how twisted and evil he can be as well. And that's interesting because when he was made as a character, he was never made to be evil. But actually what has shaped Xaphon is his complete loss of faith in Asmodeus, but also his treatment by other people has kind of shaped him into this being that's kind of not twisted and bitter and evil, but evil and chaotic. And that's what Xaphon is like if you find him in game. He will always be there to try and mess with you and try and mess your day up a little bit. There'll always be a contract or a deal or something like that, which is very devilish of him. But that is the way that he works. The other thing with Xaphon that you quite often come across are boxes of blue powder. Some of you will have come across those in your games as well, and to work out where they come from, we have to look back at Azrael Sunder, and again, our 12-hour sponsored game. When Xaphon disappeared, he left behind a pile of blue powder. That blue powder has been gathered up and stored, and over time has kind of been split off and lost and traded and all other kinds of things as well. So beware of any blue powder that you find in our games, because it's likely to be the essence of Xaphon. People thought initially that that was Xaphon himself, that his form had disintegrated, but it isn't. It's just his essence, and it is incredibly dangerous stuff. It's very potent stuff as well, and Xaphon will travel the world trying to find his blue powder to bring it back together to kind of restore more of his power. The more of that powder he has, the more powerful Xaphon becomes. So, in a nutshell, that's Xaphon. That is our evil god residing in hell. And of course, his opposite number is the one and only Targwyn. Now, I can't talk in as much detail about Targwyn as I can about Xaphon, but I can tell you how Targwyn came to be and what's happened in the short time that Targwyn has been god. Targwyn was Kerry's character from the Dark Ascension game. And while our players thought they were going to be trying to reascend the gods, that wasn't necessarily the case. What we were really looking for was a player to turn into God, and that's what we did with Kerry's character. Kerry played a character called Chloe Targwyn, who was a New Yorker through and through. And the way that we decided who was going to be picked was each table nominated one of their number to be put forward. And then we got everyone together at the end of the day, and each DM had to present their nominee to the rest of the room, and then all of the players were able to cast a vote by going and standing by the player they wanted to ascend to godhood. Now, at the time, they didn't know they were going to be ascending them to godhood. We were just looking for like the best player character on the day. And the only rule was you can't vote for the person who was on your table. Now, Kerry's character won that by a mile. And I had great pleasure in pulling Kerry to the side right at the end of the game and presenting them with a certificate for Targwyn, which showed that they had ascended to godhood, and gave them the narrative of Barnaby Thrall, who's our high vessel, taking them into his massive palace cathedral thing in Lord's Gathering and going through that ascension. It was amazing. It was such a cool moment to see Kerry's face light up with that, and was great to be able to take a player character and put them into such a prominent, powerful position in our world. It also allowed us to then put into place that dichotomy of gods, which I spoke about right at the start of this episode, where we have two gods now called Xaphon and Targwyn. Now, those names are completely IP protectable by us, and they are unique as well. They are our own gods, and we use them on a daily basis. You'll notice as well, I mentioned that Targwyn's name was Chloe Targwyn. We dropped the Chloe and stuck with the Targwyn because it just felt a little bit more fantasy and a little bit more epic. And when Kerry very graciously gave over control of their character to me, I got some background and bits and pieces as well. Now, one of Targwyn's icons, I suppose, or sigils, was a pigeon. Now, I took that pigeon sigil and changed it into an owl, being a little bit more epic and a little bit more kind of wise. That doesn't mean that the pigeon sigil is gone forever, and certainly after a recent conversation with Kerry, there are now some cults who are pushing this pigeon message with Targwyn, and you'll see that pop up kind of throughout games and throughout episodes and bits and pieces as well. The problem that we had with Targwyn, not the problem, the challenge I suppose we had with Targwyn, is that Targwyn was always a teenager. So we've taken a teenage girl and ascended them into godhood, and that's pretty epic. And that required a lot of input from Barnaby Thrall and a lot of mentorship as well, and how we overcome that. What it also means is that Xaphon can continue his nefarious means, while Targwyn finds their feet in the celestial realm. And I think that's a really, really cool message, as we're seeing Targwyn start to appear more and more, and realising their power and being able to have this impact on the world, but not quite realising how impactful it is. And if we think back to our episode, the Nat-Pun podcast, where Vesper G and Adonis met the High Vessel, and he spoke about this kind of thing, the reaction that Vesper in particular, I think, gave was, well, Who gave you the right to do that? Why does your decision matter ahead of anybody else's? Why are you able to influence the Pantheon above anyone else? And that was a really interesting episode and really kind of delved into the kind of moral aspects of a mortal man being able to mentor a god. And it's an interesting relationship that you don't normally see with a Pantheon, that we can play on and that we will play on and we have played on and will continue to do that as we kind of grow Targwin's influence across the world. There are certainly no plans at the moment for Targwin to disappear or go anywhere. Targwin is a permanent fixture in the All Havens and now is one of our gods. And it's a great example of how we can use our player characters and how your actions in our games matter and actually drive our narrative forwards. Of course, that being said, the decisions you make in your game are up to you, and if you come to our 12-hour game and end up killing Targwin somehow and everyone does it, then there's a good chance we might be looking for a new god. But as it stands at the moment, that's not the case. Targwin is very much there, very much opposed to Xaphon. We've even had one instance in the campaign where I've run where Targwin and Xaphon have had to work together. Now that is something that doesn't happen very often, and it was really quite a nice moment to see them work side by side, or sort of side by side, in trying to influence the party's decisions as to who they're going to align themselves with. Xaphon at the moment is probably more competent with his power, but Targwin probably has greater potential and is also good and not evil, which obviously helps things along as well. So there you go, that's our Pantheon, Xaphon and Targwin, having taken over from the original Pantheon of 13. That is where we are now, that's what they're doing, and that's what's going on with them. Targwin is finding their feet, Xaphon is trying to set the world up for some kind of huge event, and in the future you'll find out how that all pans out. So that's our first episode of Loremasters. It's only a quick, short episode, a little bit of a lore injection for you all, a little bit of information, but hopefully there's something in here that you didn't know that you now know, and when you come across Xaphon or Targwin in your games, you're going to understand a little bit more about where they come from and how they got where they are. So thank you very, very much for listening. If you did enjoy today's episode, please head over to the Discord server, drop down to that Nat-Pun chat, let me know what you learned, let me know what you didn't know at the start of the episode that you know now, and let me know what you want to hear about in a future episode of Loremasters. We've got another 3 of these coming out in April, and then like I say, if it goes well, maybe we'll release some Patreon exclusive episodes, and certainly if there's any scheduling issues again in the future for the main run of the Nat-Pun podcast, then we'll drop them in place of those episodes as well. Okay, well, I'm going to leave you all with that. Thank you very, very much for listening, and we'll see you all again very soon. And of course, it's time now to shout out our Patreon members. We have our Ruby members, Niall R, Laura D, Claire C, Pole C, Rebecca M, Alberta S and Joshua M.
Our Sapphire members, Gary S, Dave R, Kylie T, and our Emerald member, Stuart P.
The Diamond Group, Ash, Bertie, John, Andy, Dave F, Martin M, Chris L and Zeke W.
And Obsidian, we have Ant. Deck was in here, but his direct debit bounced. And for our ruling council, we've got JP, Sophia S, and Chris BT.
Thank you to all of our Patreon members for supporting what we do at the Charity Gaming Guild. If you want to shout out on the Nat-Pun podcast, head over to patreon.com/charitydnd today and sign up to a tier.